Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a very disturbing set of stories from the deep woods. I also need to warn you that some of these stories contain mention of people losing their lives or taking their own. You have been warned. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My father and I were taking a quick hike just a few miles north of Butte, Montana. It's not absolute wilderness that far outside of Butte, but just a few miles outside of most towns in Montana means you're way out in the backwoods. It wasn't an unusual day by any means, a warm June afternoon, perfect for a little hike. We were only a mile or so away from where we parked when we saw a large trash bag along the trail. I hate litter bugs, especially out in the woods. When I attempted to lift the bag though, it was heavy, much heavier than I had anticipated. Curiosity got the better of my father and me, and we split the bag open to see what was inside. I was expecting a dead animal of sorts. It's not uncommon for someone to dispose of a dead cat or dog in this fashion in this part of the world. Some people out here will poach deer and leave the trimmings like this too. Upon opening the bag though, we saw a boot, then socks, then pants. Then we realized they were attached to a human leg and another human leg. It looked so unreal, like someone took a saw and cut off a store dummy's leg at the groin. This had to be some sort of prank, right? It wasn't. I fell backwards and started having a panic attack. Nothing prepares you for something like that. My dad, on the other hand, sprung into action. He immediately closed the bag up as best he could and then started to slowly survey our surroundings. That freaked me out even more. Through my gasps, I asked him what he was looking for. All he said was that someone might be watching us. Can you imagine stumbling upon a serial killer's dump site and they're at distance watching you? That really didn't help with my panic. As I tried to calm down, my dad called the Silver Bow County Sheriff and reported what we found. Limp-legged, we hiked back the mile or so to the road and waited for the cops to show up. The authorities searched the area with cadaver dogs for a week, but never found any other pieces of body or even a scent trail to follow. The sheriff's people even searched our truck to see if we might have been the ones responsible. Nothing ever came of the whole incident. Not a single thing. It's been a little over 12 years and no one has any idea who the legs belong to or how they got there. No missing person reports matched up, and DNA for the legs never showed up on any databases. Butte, Montana has a reputation for being a bit on the rough side, so it's not impossible the guy was a local who ran into trouble. But why wouldn't his family or friends report him missing? Surely someone would notice he was gone, or at least legless. I don't think we'll ever know the truth, but someone out there knows what happened, and they aren't too eager to give the whole story. So me and my friend were out late one night, probably around 10 PM, and we were chasing the sound of coyotes on the back end of my property. We had a suppressed .22, and we're going to see if we could catch one with that, and hopefully drive the pack away from my chickens. Well, we found a nesting spot for a group of deer when we were making our way to the back of the property. If you haven't seen this, it's basically just a flat spot and a patch of grass or something in the woods, and in this case, a tall patch of grass. We're coming up past this spot that we saw a nestling area, and we see this beautiful buck. It's not hunting season, and we're not equipped to deal with it, even if it was in addition to the fact that it's nighttime. So we just take the opportunity to enjoy looking at this beautiful 6 to 8 point buck when he turns and looks at us. We're probably 75 yards away from looking at him over tall grass coming through what is probably his nesting spot, or the nesting spot for some of his doe. Now it's not like he's going to be protective over the spot or anything. We actually expected him to take off and run as soon as he noticed us, but he didn't. Instead, this 5.5 foot, probably 200-pound specimen of buck starts stamping his foot back and forth alternatingly. He's making this crazy wheezing noise like a person breaking through a plastic tube. It's quite unsettling. I've never seen an animal act this way, let alone a deer. Compound that with the fact that me and my friend are out here in the dark. So we just sit there and watch. I've got the gun ready but have no expectation of needing to fire it. It's just acting funny. He's probably got his Jones going a bit too hard, so it's not a big deal. Until the damn thing starts spinning and just holds on full speed, spinning in a full circle, and then I swear to God, the damn thing starts laughing. Not wheezing, not coughing, laughing like a man. A clear chuckling like a person standing behind the deer, but the laughter is coming from the deer. Then this thing stands up on 2 feet and bounces through the grass towards the woodlines, and we never see it again, clearing a 4-foot fence in the process. Yeah, we gave up on coyotes, went back, killed the 24 case, and tried to get back to sleep. My ex and I were waiting for a party in college and decided to meander around dirt roads no one really touched. We found a flipped car in the ditch. The driver's arm was sticking outside the window, and we slowly approached it and tried to talk to the person to see if they were alive. We touched their hand that was sticking out, just hoping for a response. We called 911 as soon as we saw it, but it took time for them to arrive. When they did, whoever was in the car was now dead. We were passing the time to have a good fun party college night, but instead stumbled across a dead body. I feel so heartbroken even thinking about it, thinking about how we grabbed his hand and tried to help, but he was already gone. They assumed he was just speeding on a dirt road and flipped the car, 'cause that's how dirt roads are if you don't know how to drive on them. And he had what looked like a sports car, which definitely should not have been speeding on a dirt road. I always wonder who it was and why it happened. Was he just being goofy and speeding about, or was it intentional? How long did he suffer before he passed away alone? No matter what the cause, at least he isn't suffering anymore. It's just traumatic. If you see a random dead body, I don't think it ever leaves your head. In college, my buddy and I were camping at the Mount Washington Lean to have 3 days of spring skiing at Tuckerman's Ravine. If you don't know the area, there are no lifts. You hike up a very steep and relatively short run, and the camping is about 2 to 3 hours from the parking lot. We wake up to a beautiful morning with not a cloud in the sky. Unfortunately, the Forest Service report says 50-mile-an-hour winds at the ski area. The mountain has the highest wind speed records on Earth, and we decided to take a short hike and then hopefully ski in the afternoon. After an hour, we can see the lean-to. Clouds roll in, and it's a complete whiteout blizzard. We're above the tree line with no markers, and we end up coming down the wrong side, hiking for hours in sometimes chest-deep snow. We finally hit a road and walk around another few hours and find a motel. We beg for a room, and after some cajoling we get one. The next morning we hitchhike 20 miles back to the base parking lot, climb up for hours to get our skis and camping gear, and there's a raging windstorm at the lean-tos, and we have to ski/slide down an icy trail to the parking lot. A few years later, my girlfriend, now wife, are cross-country skiing in Vermont in the spring. It's a one-way trip from a car we left back to my brother's car. We have a map and compass, and we're following the long trail markers on the trees. It has recently snowed, so it's only our tracks. The prior summer the trail has been moved, not on our map, but they leave up some of the old tree markers. We become lost and decide to settle in for the night. I dug a deep pit to build a fire, and at about 10 the pit collapsed and put the fire out. It's pitch black, and we dug out some snow caves, but my inner brain was rebelling. Just then the moon rose, and I could strap on the skis and collect more firewood. We were rescued by volunteer snowmobilers, as my brother had called the police at 3 a.m, and it took 3 hours to get back to our car. Finally, when we were hiking in the Angeles National Forest, and I had a baby in my backpack, We saw a mountain lion. My wife yelled run, but I calmed her quickly and we slowly backed away. When we were a safe distance away, she took the baby like a football and sprinted down the trail. I saw her meet a small group coming up, and when I got to her, I asked if she had warned them and she said coldly, no, that she wanted to have someone between us and the lion. Her maternal instincts seemed to have eroded common courtesy, but thankfully there was nothing on the news that evening about anyone being attacked. I have a story that made me understand what real and visceral dread feels like. A story that was so harrowing to me at the time that I felt every primal instinct in my body all scream at once until I was petrified with fear. I'm from Wisconsin, like Deep Woods Trailer Park, Wisconsin. My friends and I would usually take nightly strolls around the back area of the trailer park I lived in. There was a circular track extended further towards the sequestered residences. Taking these fright hikes was our favorite thing to do. We would sometimes encounter inexplicable phenomena, and honestly it made me wonder if I lived in some kind of real Bermuda Triangle. One night me and my buddy Dom were talking about going on another midnight escapade, but something interrupted our conversation to the point where we couldn't open our mouths to muster another word. A few miles away, we heard the loudest screech and squall erupt from the forest. Each call would occur within intervals of 10 to 15 seconds, and I say call because it sounded like a giant bird mixed with a human that was wailing in pain. This made such a commotion that people from our trailer park started to egress their home and look at each other. They were talking about the sound while we all heard the call. The longer it went on, the more lights flicked on from other residents' homes. After whatever that was, my friend and I, as stupid as we were, decided to go for our walk anyway. No one was going to stop us from enjoying our favorite pastime. That was a big mistake. I remember doing a few laps around the dirt track. Once we started to get bored of the same itinerary, we changed course towards the dirt roads. But something felt off, as though the equilibrium of the forest's harmony ceased. We heard something slowly wading through the smaller pond out back. We both stopped completely. There would be near silence, then the sound of the water being displaced yet again by something clearly bigger than a human. We started to discuss theories, like all the plausible animals that would oddly be traversing the pond. It just didn't make sense. We couldn't picture deer just wandering in the water back and forth, and no bears were known to live around our area. Our whispers ceased in an instant when we noticed none of the animals in the forest or insects were making noise, not even this dog we heard barking from one of the park residents. That hit me. It hit me hard. I started to remember all of these ghastly and eerie stories about entities or creatures making other animals cease or noise. Well, this felt like that. We both looked at each other, and before we could speak, we heard the water separate as something briskly left the pond. 3 or 4 more huge footsteps pounded the ground beneath this thing, and it finally ended with a log being snapped. This sounded like it weighed at least 600 pounds. All hell rose. These animals around us went berserk, and when I mean berserk, I mean imagine animals around you at a zoo screaming all at once on volume 11. We couldn't move for at least 5 minutes or more. I don't even remember. We decided to leave when the noise from the animals abated. We, as surreptitiously as humanly possible, walked back home. I honestly felt like I was going to be attacked at any moment, and it felt like dread incarnate was looming over my neck. I thought about what happened for quite some time, and after even more time it passed. But it didn't end there. About 2 years later, I went for a walk with my friend Jared. I started to tell him the story of what happened that I mostly kept to myself. Of course, he thought I was nuts. But a week after that, when he came to visit again, I heard the sound again screaming from the forest. Like dumbasses, we went to investigate. I can't explain the rest. We bought a knife and a stupid-ass BB gun for protection, no flashlight naturally. Well, as we approached a glade in the woods next to the pond, we heard a thumping sound run towards us within an instant. It sounded like 2 bare feet. I could feel this energy from the entity traveling behind each step. I screamed and fell into my friend. I explicitly to this day remember the footsteps and the sounds they made less than a few feet in front of me before they stopped. But there was nothing. We booked it back through a bramble of thorns. Each cut was worth the retreat. After deciding to be prudent for once, we did our investigation during the day. The glade of the forest didn't have any footprints. Nothing. Until I looked up into the canopy of trees. Imagine this. In a circle of trees, all the branches, about 8 feet up or higher, were snapped in half. But even more inexplicable, the branches would only be snapped in half if another branch on the same trunk was adjacent to each other, and it formed a kind of ring shape on each tree. After some time, strange things stopped happening altogether on our hikes. Sometimes I missed that as an adult, but now I treasure my solace. When I was around 16, so 20 or so years ago, I would visit my mum during the summer holidays and winter break from school. At the time, I lived in the US and she lived in Iowa. While the city she was in is fairly large, we lived in the suburbs, and in particular our house had this huge yard, then a sizable area of woods behind and besides that. Our house had a back deck that spanned the entire length of the house, so there's the deck, 100 or so meters of back garden, and then woods for a kilometer or so before it opened into another neighborhood. One very late night, I'm sitting alone in the kitchen. We had a TV in there, and I've had insomnia all my life, and I would either be perusing on the internet or computer, as we also kept it in the kitchen, and sometimes even watching TV when I couldn't sleep. The house had been undergoing expansion and renovations in some form or another for the bulk of my childhood, so we didn't have a trim around the large glass back door yet, and as such, there weren't permanent curtains installed yet, just a sheet thumbtacked to the wall. There were gaps in the sheet, as it didn't quite fit. It's 3 a.m. I'm watching Cowboy Bebop and smoking cigarettes in the kitchen. It's been all quiet at night. My mum and stepdad have been asleep upstairs for hours, and apart from the occasional coyote yips, there are no sounds outside. It had snowed that day, not super heavy by Iowa standards, just about 6 inches of snow. I suddenly realized that there has been this noise that isn't coming from the television. It's a light, rapping noise, like someone is tapping the glass on the back door with their fingernails. It's pitch black out there. The lights are on in the kitchen, and the door is only about 2 meters from where I'm sitting at the kitchen table. I turn slowly, knowing full well if there's someone out there, they're going to be able to see me and I can't see them. However, they would have to be crouching. The aforementioned gaps in the sheet that covers the door are close to floor level, and I can't see anyone. But not a second after I turn to look, there are 3 loud, sharp bangs on that glass, hard enough that I can see the glass wiggle just a bit. I bolted all the way upstairs into the loft and tried to see who was pounding on the back door from the window up there, but it was too dark to see anyone. I don't know why. I didn't want to wake my parents, although I absolutely should have. I huddled on the futon in the loft until morning, too afraid to go anywhere near any windows again and feeling somewhat more secure on the 2nd floor. My bedroom was on the 1st floor and had windows looking directly out and at the same level of the deck, and no curtains, so I wasn't sleeping there. Still, I didn't sleep that night at all. Later, while trying to rationalize the situation enough to calm me down to sleep, I thought maybe some friend of the family had a late night at the bar a bit down the road and started to feel bad for not checking on who it was or waking up my folks to check on me. Or what if it had been a stranger in need of help? Not the safest, but we didn't have cell phones yet back then. They were available, just primitive. Their friends wouldn't have known the number for mine at any rate. But I was a kid and terrified out of my mind, so I wasn't thinking clearly. I wondered why he wouldn't just knock on the front door, or why he'd done the odd tapping routine. When my stepdad woke up the next morning to find me in my clothes from the day before in the loft, he asked me what I was up to. I told him about the previous night's scare, and we went downstairs to check it out. I'm so glad I didn't check out what it was after all, because in the fresh snow there were large boot prints directly from the wood, across the expanse of backyard right up to the door and back across the yard to the woods. The terrifying part of this is there's a steep embankment to even get out of the woods and into our back garden. You can't see my back door from the woods, even at night with the lights on, owing to its angle. It's part of why the curtains weren't terribly important to us, so for someone to deliberately walk out of those woods and up to our back door, and only to our back door, meant they knew it was there. It hadn't snowed the days previously, so God knows how many times whoever it was had just been at the back door watching. We never did find out who it was. Dad put some motion sensor lights in and I started watching TV in the front room instead from then on. I worked in Yellowstone and got off work at around 10 p.m. I had to walk back to my dorm, which is about a mile, so by the time I got back to hiking it was around 11 p.m. Normally you're not supposed to hike alone, and not necessarily at night, especially not alone at night. But I go alone because that's what I like to do, and I usually have some weed buried at the top of the mountain. Every night after work, I would hike about 2 miles up the mountain, unbury my weed, smoke a joint and hike back down. I did this for about 2 months, no problem. Nothing ever happened. I always carried bear spray and a light, as well as my music to help ward off animals, and nothing ever happened. One night I go up to my spot. I'm smoking, and I see 3 headlights coming from the direction of the trail. In my mind I thought it could be other hikers, or it could be MPS officers, so I decide to turn off my headlight and put my joint out to just wait and listen. I waited for about 10 minutes, which was more than enough time for these people to come directly by me on the trail. However, I never saw any lights come by me, and there were no offshoots to the trail. Didn't really think too much of it though, just kind of weird, and I went back to smoking my joint, but didn't turn my light on. Right as I'm finishing my joint, I hear what sounds like either a person or a very large animal break a few sticks a few feet behind me. At this point, instant fear. I'm thinking it's a mountain lion or a moose, or maybe a bear, or a person. How did any of them get behind me and I not notice? Slowly I put my bear spray in my right hand and move my left hand up to the button on my headlamp, which I turn on and shine towards the area super fast. I turn with bear spray in hand, but what I see is absolutely nothing. I move my light all around, do a 360. There wasn't anything. Being relatively sure there was a creature of some sort, I decided to bury my weed, pack up and get down the mountain as fast as possible. Usually it took me around, 45 minutes to an hour to get down the mountain. However, that night I got down in 15 minutes. I didn't go back up alone for about 2 weeks. I got comfortable again after I started going back up alone, and nothing ever happened again. I went hunting with my dad for the first time. He took me to his usual hunting spot, but then we found a better spot. It was this bowl-like shape in the mountain, and there was a lot of animal activity there, so we thought it was a steal of a place. It was our second to last day, and we decided to split up on this ridge that looks down on thick brush on both sides. My dad sat a few yards at the top, and I sat towards the middle/bottom. Anyway, we'd been there about an hour and a half, and I was just dinking around until I heard a rifle go off. Then this bear-like howl came after. I sat there, my dad came down, and we listened to the bear make its way to our area. We heard it roar, and began fighting something else that had a way deeper howl. It was super loud and so intense. We heard the bear yip and tear down trees. We could hear feet hit the ground and the thuds of whatever was hitting the bear. It went on for 20 minutes, and then we heard the bear give out in a low howl, and the thuds slowly went away. We sat there for 20 minutes before we went for the fire trail at the bottom of the ridge. Its hooves or feet were loud, intense, and heading towards us. We ran to the fire trail at the bottom and waited. We heard the thing stopped where we were just on the ridge. The deep breaths this thing took. It made a gruffing sound like it was smelling or trying to cough, just hovering in the air before we walked off. We didn't see anything, as there was brush blocking where we were just at, but we waited 10 minutes and headed to the area we believed the fighting was happening. The whole area was destroyed. It looked like a plane had crashed. We didn't see a carcass, but we did hear a final howl. It was deep and loud and came from the thing that walked through our spot off the ridge. It sounded like it was on the ridge behind us. Since then, we haven't had an encounter like that, but I won't forget it. I'm not sure what it was, probably a moose, but it was frickin' scary. This happened a few years ago, when me and my buddies went into the woods around 9 p.m. To get to the woods, you have to cross an old road that leads to a waterworks factory. This road separates the housing estate and the woods. Well, we were crossing this road and decided to enter through a different place we'd never been to before, and we were only about halfway down the road when something whistled at us. You might be thinking it's probably just your mates or something like that, but this was different. We knew it was coming from the bushes almost instantly and legged it back towards the houses. Naturally, my fight or flight impulse kicked in and I ran, but in the complete opposite direction of my buddies. They ran back to where they came, and for some reason I ran straight towards the place the whistling was coming from. When I realized I was going the wrong way, I screamed and saw a silhouette of a man in the bush and nearly fell over trying to run around. We all regrouped and made the ultimate collective decision to go back in, but there was nothing. No person, no second whistle, no speakers or anything. The silhouette I saw was gone, so we went into the trees and found an opening, like a little circle of ground in amongst the trees. We found a teddy bear. It was deliberately placed and positioned where it was. Sitting on top were 2 twigs made to look like a cross, the other 4 sticks holding the bear in place. We took a picture, left, and never returned. I've since lost contact with my buddies due to starting college and them entering their final year of high school, but I tried going there the other day, but all the paths have been blocked off by fallen trees due to recent red warning winds in the UK. Storm Arwen ruined the beautiful forest and buried a mystery that I never got to solve. This happened about 20 years ago while hunting with my dad in northern British Columbia. It was a cold October morning, and it was still dark when we parked the truck and started our hike into a clear cut. I was familiar with the area as we had moose hunted there before. My dad went left and I went right, and I'd made my way to the top of a slope to get a better view of the clear cut. I found a stump to sit on and took out my binoculars and quickly found my dad in the clear cut across the mountain. As soon as I spotted him, I heard something heavy move behind me in the forest, roughly 40 yards away. I'm thinking, yes, a moose. I then head towards the forest edge, when I hear a scream and screech sound, the likes of which I'd never heard before. It didn't sound human, but it also didn't sound animal. I'd never heard it before, it was very loud, and I swear my soul nearly left my body. I turned around and ran down that clear-cut hill as fast as my teenage legs would take me. When I got to my dad, he said he had heard it too, and found me in his binoculars running down the clear-cut. Then looked up at the forest's edge and said he saw a big, hairy human-like creature standing at about 8 feet tall between 2 birch trees. It stayed for a few seconds, then turned around and was gone. We got in the truck, went home for the day, and we asked the elders and relatives about it when we got back, and they called them the Forest Guardians. Still scares the hell out of me. I was out at my parents' place shooting on the old range. After we were done, my friend went off to take a leak behind some bushes. When he was finished, he called out, "Hey, come on, you gotta see this." I walk in and saw what he was looking at. It looked like a canvas butcher's apron hung from a tree to form a kind of pouch, about 4 foot off the ground. There were blood stains on it. When we looked closer, we noticed it had 4 or 5 deer legs in it that had been cut off right around the knee. This was on private land, quite far away from any of the neighbors, and in a place where none of them would have a line of sight to. In order for them to be hung out there, someone would have had to have hiked to the nearest road across about 400 to 500 yards of open field without being observed by any of the neighbors on the way into the woods. We called the police and a deputy sheriff stopped by to take pictures and to take a statement. They said it was probably coyote hunters. He didn't seem too interested in the fact that none of them had permission to hunt there. 20 years later, and we never found out who did it, as this was a few decades before trail cams were remotely affordable or popular. When we were around 11, 10 and 9, my brothers, some friends and I, in Arkansas, we would spend a lot of time in the woods. About an hour away from any road, we had this cool tree house with a swing that was a set of handlebars tied to a rope. This swing was 30 feet in the air and very dangerous. One day, hiking to the treehouse, we stumbled across this guy. He did not look homeless, but did look scruffy. He tried to convince us to hang out with him, saying that he had pornographic material and alcohol. As you can imagine, we made a quick escape out of there. I'm so glad we did, as walking back we were all feeling quite creeped out after the encounter. It was a few months later, when I saw the picture of the man, my heart nearly skipped a beat. There, on the news, was the guy who had been trying to tell us to go with him. He had been arrested for molesting at least one kid, and I shudder to think what he could have done to us when we were out in the deep woods in the middle of nowhere. I was doing video work in Central America on this research island. I had been on this trail with one of the scientists about 5 times, doing a loop around the island, getting footage of animals no problem. But one day our group does a loop in reverse. I fall behind a little bit because I'm shooting a very pretty spider, thinking I can catch up easy. When I try to hustle back to the group, I can't find them, and suddenly the trail starts to fork, which it never did when we went the right way. Several more forks later, I'm super lost in the rainforest and start seeing prohibido signs painted on the woods lining the trail, which means prohibited. Then I started seeing animal traps, and eventually a very large deteriorating wooden sign with a very distinct hand-painted biohazard symbol painted on it. Cue a few roaring howler monkeys. I think it was the only time I've ever experienced genuine panic when the body disregards the brain. Thankfully, I made it back okay, but it was still incredibly nerve-wracking to be lost in the middle of nowhere. When I was about 10 years old, I used to love exploring the woods behind our school with 3 of my friends. We wanted to find the perfect spot to build a treehouse that wouldn't be easily found. We found a place and started thinking about how we were going to develop it to build our treehouse. At 10, we had very ambitious plans. Well, one day, when we were going to the treehouse together, we stumbled upon something we weren't expecting to find in our lost grove. It turns out a gentleman had had a very similar idea to us, but instead of using it as a sacred space to play with your friends, he had chosen it as his final resting place via noose. Seeing the dead body scarred me for a long time. As you can imagine, we didn't want to make our base there anymore after we found that. I live in Northern Ireland. We don't have bears, wolves, or big cats. But we do have rumours of big cat sightings and farm animals being mauled by them, but nothing has ever been caught. My dad, myself, and a family friend were antler hunting on a private property with free-roaming fallow deer, and we had been searching the woods for around 2 to 3 hours with limited success. In the middle of an open field, we found a deer carcass that had been ripped to pieces. The fur was scattered in a similar fashion to how a cat would pluck its prey, and we got nervous. Later, we wandered into a dense forest, and I found 2 freshly severed rabbit feet. This could easily be chalked up to the raptors, buzzards, which are birds of prey, but when we found a freshly severed deer leg, that was something else. It was around the exact same time we noticed the forest had fallen deathly silent. We did not wait around to see what was lurking. We bailed and never returned. I was leading an expedition over the Devil's Elbow for our main base camp into the Panthertown Valley. We had decided to spend a day on a nearby detour to some waterfalls. We'd seen 2 so far and were deep into a bushwhack looking for a third one. We were struggling through a thicket of briars and brambles when suddenly everything clears. No trees, no bushes, no briars, only an overgrown, grassy clearing. Dead in the middle was a rusted old Ferris wheel. It wasn't huge, probably only 30 foot high, and obviously built for smaller children. It was rusty and sun-faded, with tall grass growing up around its base. We just stood there in silence, unsure of exactly how to process it. There was no reason for that to have been there. Somebody at some point hauled that thing in piece by piece and assembled it there. But the question is, why? I was out walking around in the forest surrounding my town at night in the middle of winter, alone. I was just listening to music and dancing around, but I felt a little uneasy suddenly, and I decided to stop for a bit and take out my earbuds. And right as I did, the weirdest noise came from some trees nearby. Something or someone was hitting them repeatedly with a stick. It became more and more aggressive, and it sounded like it came closer. I bolted, and luckily the hitting stopped. I heard some footsteps, but no one saw. I would have probably avoided that part of the forest for the rest of my life if I had have believed in ghosts, because it's right by a Viking graveyard. Hopefully it was just a weird animal or hunter, but I still don't know what it was, and it never happened again. I still do my night walks in the same area though. Hiking through my regular trail. The trail is part of a park that closes at dusk. I tried to go at least for a little run every day. Well, it was late. The path was about a 20-minute run if you take the short route, and I arrived at around 8:30. About halfway through, there's a large opening so people can sit or picnic, and I see on a tree a Raggedy Ann doll has been nailed to it. It has a pentagram drawn on the forehead and a note attached saying, "Touch me." Written in very small writing under the note, it says, "Don't touch me," with another pentagram. I ran that last 10 minutes at about 5. I went back the next day, and the strange doll was gone. When I was 11, I went camping with my mum, her boyfriend, and my little brother. Outside of Las Vegas, in the middle of the desert. We went arrow hunting one morning, and during our hike we stumbled upon a full human skeleton laying on a blanket kind of tucked under a bush, laying on their back like they fell asleep and never woke up. The boyfriend knelt down and prayed over the remains, and we walked back a bit to the campsite silent, everyone in complete shock. A ranger was called, and the boyfriend got into the helicopter to show him where the remains were. Turned out to be a presumed person who took their own life. He'd been missing for almost a year. It was suspicious that the whole skeleton was still intact though, and that image is burnt into my brain. I used to be a mountain bike photographer. I'd hike, sometimes drive miles up a mountainside and take pictures of the events. Apparently some deadbeat dad, despite the mum's complaints, encouraged his kids to do the ride alone. The dad didn't do the event, he was just drunk in the RV. The mum was there and didn't know. I found the kid, alone, with a broken arm, 15 miles out into the woods. He was laying in the bushes. He was quiet. I asked if he had cell service and he said no. I asked for his mum's number and ran to the next rest stop a mile ahead. It was awful having to leave the child alone. I stopped doing events shortly after that, mostly because it was too risky. I'd be alone with no cell service, no gun to protect me from bears, and often riders would go missing, and I mentally just couldn't do it anymore. 13-year-old me was walking through the woods with a friend. He tried to spook me with a bunch of dumb made-up stories about a white wolf in the area that eats children. I say yeah, whatever. Not 5 minutes later we come to the crest of a hill and are looking down into a dell. I kid you not, there is a huge white canine sitting on its haunches looking right at us, not moving a muscle. Just to the left of it, a large cardboard filled with various parts of recently butchered carcass of indeterminable origin. We stand there gobsmacked for what felt like an eternity and bolted out of there. We ran 5 kilometers non-stop back to the camper. I was once walking through the woods at around 6 p.m. It was after dinner, and we had a family gathering outside, so no one really cared that I went exploring. It started to get dark, so I decided I should walk back, but I would stop and see my friend, since she lived on the same road as us. As I was walking, I heard something running around ahead of me. Since I couldn't see it, I thought it was a rabbit or something. I turned around to see how far I had walked, since my legs were getting tired, but then I saw a figure peek around the trail at me. I just about crapped myself and booked it. Once I got to my friend's house, I told her, and she laughed at me, saying I was seeing things. Whenever I got home, I told my family about it, and they mocked me for the rest of the night, saying, "He's coming for you. You better watch your back." But I know what I saw. I was smoking with a friend in the forest. We sat on some benches in the woods and blazed. The paths through the woods are completely dark, and you can't see anything without a flashlight. Then all of a sudden a dude in a suit and a suitcase came out of nowhere. Not where the actual path should be, but from behind us, straight out of the forest. It was crazy. He managed to achieve this with no light, just walking through the woods. I still can't fathom what on earth he was doing there. It wasn't before long that he was gone, and my friend and I were often left wondering about the mysterious briefcase man, how he got there, and where he was going. My brother was solo hiking a small mountain near our home for field recording. He found the remains of a sacrificed goat and what appeared to be a black magic ritual. It was burnt with its fur still intact, and then placed in trees about 10 meters from each other. Near the site he heard a growl. He saw the footprint of what appeared to be a black panthera on a previous hike, and he started to run. We think the panthera eats the goat carcasses and was upset because he walked across his territory. Clearly not a safe situation to be in. When I was around 13 or 14, me and my friend were hiking in the woods behind her house when we came upon an abandoned one-story house, very small kitchen, bathroom, main room, and a bedroom. The walls looked like they were covered in both blood and dog poo. The bedroom area had wood across the bottom of the door, such as to maybe keep a dog or dogs from the room. And, from the amount of crap that was in there. It was probably poo that was all over the walls. There was also a suitcase in the house. We opened it and it was full of romance novels, Barbara Cartland as well as Harlequin romances. They were all in mint condition. My friends and I took the books to read. We were hormonal teenage girls after all. Today the woods are gone, and there is now a subdivision. But we always did wonder about that place. This happened about 2 years ago. A man drove up on the trail, stripped down, and began chasing my friend and I with his car. As you can imagine, this wasn't fun. We climbed a large dirt mound that he couldn't drive up and ran across the empty highway and hid in tall grass for hours. We were just there, waiting, praying that he wouldn't find us, until we saw another hiker. Once we got to our hostel, we told the owner, and she casually said that it was a local guy that does that from time to time, and that he is, quote, harmless. For future hikers, it's right before you get to the halfway point on the Camino de Santiago. My mum used to be into drugs, and we lived in rural Indiana, so she would sleep and at times wouldn't even wake her up when we had to go to school. One morning we went out to the woods. We had everything out there, to the point where we would get into trouble. We would bring all of our toilet paper out there if we didn't have any in the house. At one time our mum was asleep, and we were out there early. We'd hiked a long way, and I sat down on a dead log and a mosquito landed on me. It bit me, and the ground started vibrating. It felt like being in a utility room next to a washing machine. I assumed it was West Nile because I didn't know anything about the disease. In my child mind, if you get bit, the symptoms would settle in immediately. We went home and my mum demanded to know where we were. Things had started falling off the shelves and we had suffered an earthquake. We lived on a major fault line, but we didn't know at the time. We had a bunch of tornadoes, but I never imagined we'd have earthquakes. I just thought it was West Nile. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to our members and patrons, whose names can be seen on screen. Thank you so much for your contributions, guys. It really makes a huge difference and means the world to me. I'm hoping to see you on the weekend for a really fun rain compilation that I think you'll really enjoy. And then back again on Tuesday for even more spooks. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.